do business with people they like. And so building those relationships and building a community feel where people feel, hey, I need some help.
Nothing beats getting in a room together and just throwing stuff up on a whiteboard and seeing what sticks and what slowly slides off as you investigate it further.
It's one thing to be able to say, hey, we know what the issues are. It's something entirely different to be able to say, and here's what the really smart CEOs are doing about it.
I am absolutely delighted that we've got Sian Heaphy on the show today. It's taken us a little while to get a good time together, being in different parts of the world. But Sian is a transformation leader. She's got over 14 years experience of driving growth across marketing, sales, and customer success teams. In a nutshell, she's a go-to-market strategist. She's got a track record spanning events, tech, media, and professional services, and she specializes in turning that strategy into actual action. We all know how many times we probably sat down, got a really good strategy together, and maybe not done anything with it. Sian's expertise is about how she aligns people, platforms, processes to kind of accelerate that access to revenue and potentially scale the performance. She's worked across the US and right across EMEA and partners with scale-ups, enterprise organizations to break down silos, embed new ways of working, and build outcome-focused teams that deliver real impact, all very measurable. Sian's got, I would say, probably a bit of a unique experience of being able to do this in different markets. And we probably know what a large part of what we get involved with is that people strategy. How do we get people to take action in what we do? And Sian is the one who helps to activate that. Whether optimizing that go-to-market strategy or enabling cross-functional collaboration on teams who are with global businesses, Sian brings clarity, energy, and a relentless focus on results. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Hi, Sian. It's great to see you.
Lovely to see you too, Graham. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's been a long time. Sian, just to kick us off with this, I've got so many things I want to ask you.
Yeah.
And I have been looking forward to this discussion for a few weeks now. Just give us some of your background. Just tell us kind of, who is Sian Heaphy?
Yeah. Oh, God. Kicking off with a hard question. No, not really. Who am I? Well, so I guess a little bit of background in terms of, I've been in sort of marketing transformation for 15 years. I think where it really started for me was I studied languages at university, and I was always really curious about the why, like why we communicate the way we do, the words that we use, and obviously doing languages, you get to deconstruct the grammar and the sentence cadence, et cetera, and I think, yeah, as I say, it's kind of led me to this whole area in terms of why we do things the way that we do. And it started then in terms of marketing and thinking about how we communicate and how we engage customers. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit more as we go through the podcast. I think being a marketer, working in businesses, it led to, there's been a lot of learnings in terms of sort of being at the receiving end of strategy and how strategy works and how it gets cascaded. And then that sort of led me into more of the transformation space and kind of really looking more at the bigger picture and how we work together as teams, as businesses, again, still with that lens in terms of why we do what we do, who we're doing it for, et cetera, but obviously just doing it in a very different guise and on a bigger scale in some ways.
No, I didn't know this about languages. What languages?
French and Spanish.
Oh, wow.
French and Spanish.
And can you still feel free to answer any question in French or Spanish today if you'd like to? I might not be able to respond.
I'd rather not.
Okay.
I'd rather not. I'm very out of practice.
And probably for the flow of this, we shouldn't. But do feel free.
Yeah.
Do feel free.
Thank you.
So what kind of projects do you get involved with?
A range of projects. My background obviously is marketing, so I still work a lot with marketing teams and revenue generating teams, focusing on go-to-market operating models and how to improve those systems to support their growth and revenue objectives. I also spend a lot more time at the leadership level, really looking at cross-functional collaboration, how we improve alignment, how we improve cross-functional coordination. And part of that ends up being this conversation around strategic cascading and how we make sure that we're all singing to the same hymn sheet, for want of a better word.
Okay. All right. So look, there's a lot to unpack here. Okay. There's a lot. We've got cross-functional, we've got cascading. So I'm curious. Let's go back to the beginning. When we talk about strategy, what do we mean by strategy?
Oh, that's a really tough question, because there's probably lots of different answers or lots of different ways that people describe or talk about strategy. For me, I think there's a few key sort of like principles or concepts that come into strategy. And I think the first thing is strategy isn't a strategy if it isn't dictating a path that you're going to be taking. So it's got to be as much about what we say we're going to do as well as what we're not going to do. And I think it's the not going to do that sometimes businesses can fall down on. We're very good at saying we are this, we are that, but we're not going to be this, or we're not going to do that. And that's kind of where creep starts to come in and the strategy starts to dilute. I think it's also about how we're going to do it differently, not necessarily better, although that's obviously the end goal. The end goal is winning, but I think it is also how are we doing this differently to other people in our business? What makes us unique? What's the value that we deliver, and being really clear on what that is and how we're communicating that, not just to our customers, but also within the business, so that we're all aligned in terms of what we're talking about there. And then it's a set of integrated decisions. So, a strategy is just a strategy. It's just a document. If it's not, then a living, breathing sort of message, set of decisions, activity that is all driving to that outcome, that strategy that we are working towards. So it's also the set of decisions that then need to take place across different teams to be able to deliver and drive towards that goal.
I've maybe just asked you to clarify, kind of to give us an example of what a strategy is in a moment. But just before I do that, you mentioned the creep starts when we say we're not going to be. Can you just expand on that?
I'm sorry, let me rephrase. What I meant there is that I think the risk from a strategy perspective is creep starts to come in, or we start to dilute our strategic focus if we're not clear on what we are not. So we've got to say, this is what we are saying yes to, but this is also what we're saying no to. And I think if you don't have that no piece really clear, that's where you can start to dilute your strategy, essentially.
Bit of a leading question, but do you find people or companies or teams, it's easier for them to tell you what they don't want to be rather than what they do want to be?
Sometimes, I think when I've done workshops, it's definitely one of the questions that I ask. There's a lot of, we don't want to be this and we don't want to be that. It is sometimes harder to say this is who we are. But I think where the disconnect sometimes comes in is perhaps, and what's the word I'm looking for here? The follow through, for want of a better word. I think sometimes, you have to be pretty dedicated. That doesn't mean not open to listening to what the market's telling you and, adapting your strategy based on the learnings that you're getting. But I think sometimes it can be really hard to stay the course in terms of what you're saying yes to, and sometimes it can be easy to let the no's start to creep in. And you start to do more across a broader range of things versus less, but doing those things better. And I don't mean that in terms of if you've then realized the strategy really is wrong and you really do have to pivot. There is a point where data, what your customers are telling you, what your teams are telling you, are things that you have to listen to. But sometimes people can jump ship a bit too early, and they can start to dilute a lot quicker than perhaps they needed to.
I suppose that it's all about timing, isn't it? So just because we're getting some negative feedback doesn't mean to say it's wrong.
Yes,
it's sometimes a tough decision to make. The reason I asked the previous one, I regularly hear, especially in sales and from salespeople, when you ask them what they do, they always tell you what they don't do. And rather than, well, we're not one of these companies that does this, and we're not a company that does that. Well, what do you do? And it's you can see people moving away from it, but sometimes struggling with that. Can you give us an example?
Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go on.
No, I was going to say, and that probably is an indicator that there is a disconnect in your strategy. If you've got people within the business that can't say that we are this, we do that, like, that's because it's not been clearly communicated, or it's not been communicated in a way that that individual or that team understands and can then work with.
I think one of the other ones I hear is it's very difficult to say what we do because we can do so many things for so many people.
Exactly.
And I'm like, well, that's good, surely. So that's
Well, I mean, God, that could probably be a whole other podcast in and of itself. But again, that then tells me because I work with a lot of clients where they do a lot of things, and it's like, of course you do, but when you're having a conversation with a customer, like, you should have a pretty clear view either from the get-go in terms of what you think the right solution is that you're offering, or it's a much more consultative-led sale where you're getting to understand their challenges and their problems, and then you are aligning your solutions to the value that you can deliver alongside that. But again, completely different podcast conversation.
We're into the psychology, and I'm convinced that people are just scared to miss out, and then they oversell or overexpose, and just it's way too much. So when we talk about strategy, can you give an example of what a strategy would be, a practical example that we could kind of we can use?
So I'm gonna try. God, I wish I might draw a diagram for us to share. Like,
that'd be great. We can always link that.
I'm going to try and visualize this through words, but I wish I had like a diagram or something that I could just share on screen. But the first thing that a strategy starts with, or what it is that it really looks at the outcome or the why. Like, what is it that we are trying to achieve? What's the customer like problem? What's the customer experience that we are working towards? There can also be an element of what's the business problem that we are trying to solve. But I think it really starts with, before you even get into any sort of specifics, it really starts with the why and what it is that we're here to try to achieve. And I think you have to anchor it around a customer like problem or a customer ambition, or as well as then looking at the business problem or sort of business vision that you are looking towards. I think then once you've got that laid down, you can start to think about it in terms of OKRs, so the objectives and key results. And again, the reason why I say you can then start to focus on that is because, your OKRs really have to be outcome focused. If you're talking about OKRs in terms of activity, outputs, deliverables, you're not doing it right. But once you've kind of gotten really clear on your why and what's the challenge that you're here to solve, you can start to build out those OKRs. And then where the strategy then kind of goes one layer down is probably in terms of what does that mean in terms of key initiatives that we need to be working on to be able to deliver and solve that. And I think that is probably enough for a strategy to get started with, because then what you're starting to move to is the how. And there's probably a different group of people that need to get involved in those kind of conversations in terms of how we're actually going to go around delivering it. I think it's also then at that level a good enough amount of detail that you can start to be really clear in terms of the why and the what, whilst giving you some flexibility to adapt and change that based on learnings and what you're seeing and from your customers, from the market, that then can lead into where do we need to pivot, where do we need to realign, what things do we need to start to do slightly differently.
I get there's confidentiality in this. Can you give us an idea of kind of what kind of clients or what kind of products or anything like that you've worked with?
Yeah. So the industries that I work a lot with are sort of SaaS-based businesses, scale-ups, some enterprises. I do a lot in terms of like professional services, manufacturing, and I do a lot as well in sort of media publishing and events. So those are sort of the industries, types of clients that it's a real broad mix, which I love.
That's a big mix, yeah.
It is, but it's really, but I think, and every business has its own challenges and they are unique in some ways, but every business has the same challenges. When you kind of go and do that root cause analysis piece, the challenges that every businesses are typically experiencing are fairly similar. It's just how they're manifesting and how they're showing up tends to be different. So I love the variety, because actually what it helps me to do is go, well, that's interesting. We're kind of tackling it this way in manufacturing. Where could that be applied in this industry? Or we've been taking this approach over here in SaaS. Where are the learnings that could be brought into media and events or manufacturing or professional services? So I love what I do for that cross-fertilization and ability to sort of bring different ideas from those different industries to try something different, see if that works.
It's interesting. We're very much the same. We work a lot with mining, infrastructure, construction, professional services, some of the largest platforms in globally, games design companies. It's a real mix. I do remember I think one of my proudest moments was linking a construction company with a games design company, and just seeing that there was something really similar there. And I think that's lost. It's right. It's really interesting. Reading a book at the moment called Range, which is all about generalists and how we and kind of how the art of being a generalist and knowing a bit about many things rather than just being an expert in one field has been lost. And it stands us in good stead. I'm curious. So you mentioned about everybody being aligned, leadership being aligned, getting involved with that. I come across this all the time, so I'm wondering where you are with it. If you hear a leadership team saying we're absolutely aligned, we're all good in this, what's your gut instinct to tell you if that's true or not, or what's your test on it?
Oh, well, so the easy test is, and I would separate everyone out first before getting them to do it in a room together. But I think the easiest litmus test is, are they all talking about the strategy in the same way and using the same language? If the answer is yes, then at least at the surface level, there's alignment. I don't think that is the true litmus test in terms of whether it's being believed or it's being committed to. But I think an easy test anyone can do is take all of your leadership team at a one-to-one level and see if they're talking about the strategy, how we're measuring success in the same way and using the same language. If they're not, then there's probably disconnect at the leadership level already in terms of understanding of the strategy, and then also how it's being communicated down into their teams as well.
So have you ever seen like this beautifully crafted strategy kind of falling apart because of, I don't know, cultural misalignment or politics or silos or just kind of, the self-interest?
Yep. Yep, those are all of the reasons why misalignment happens within a business. Or not all of the reasons, but it's certainly some of the most common reasons in terms of, as I say, if at a leadership level you aren't using the same language, it's not going to get communicated down. If you've not got commitment at the leadership level, then again, it's not going to cascade in the same way. And I want to be really clear, I'm talking about commitment rather than consensus or agreement, because you're not always going to get that. That's the nirvana. And I've seen it happen. I've definitely seen teams that have come together and they're like, yep, we agree that this is the right way forward. But what you're really aiming for in that boardroom is commitment and agreement that this is the strategy that they're going to go forward with. And then and then after that is where you can tend to start to see that misalignment coming through, because if it's not communicated in the same way, or if you're not closing the loop. So again, you've got your strategy and then marketing is going and sort of building out this is how we're going to deliver on that. Sales, this is how we're going to deliver on that. Product, this is how we're going to deliver on it. But if they're not then also communicating, aligning, and sort of like closing the feedback loop between themselves, you can have 3 different teams doing three different things, going off in 3 different directions. And that can cause massive issues in terms of how you're then driving that strategy forward. So it's not even a one and done thing either. There has to be an element of how you're driving the strategy into the delivery rhythm of your business and how your teams are working together to keep that alignment going outside of those dedicated sessions, dedicated workshops, etc., etc.
I was going to ask you that. I mean, how do you keep it going after the kind of the rah-rah, the roadshow, the woohoo, we're all excited, this is what we're about to do. And then it's 6 months in, it's a November day, it's wet. We've had a load of no's, stuff's not quite going right. But we know we're on that path. How do we keep it going?
Yeah, and this is where I get kept in a job, right? Because this is where the challenge is, and I really don't want to underplay how hard it is to do this well, because our markets are volatile. You've got AI coming, you've got new technological innovation, you've got AI coming through. We have a hybrid workforce. 20 years ago, some of the things that we've got to talk about now probably wouldn't have happened because, everyone's in the office. And so some of that heavy lifting wasn't needed because you had proximity to help you in terms of keeping that strategy going. So it's a different world we are operating in, and it's constantly evolving. So where my work comes in a lot is how do we build the systems and conditions that ensure strategy isn't just a slide deck or a lovely Miro board that just sits there and isn't being utilized. It's how is it then getting incorporated into the day-to-day rhythm. So there's obviously things that you can be doing in terms of your planning cadence. So quarterly planning, quarterly reflections. Those are great opportunities to look at your OKRs, look at how you're sort of delivering against the strategy, and more importantly, the value that you're creating and what the impact is of what you're doing. And that gives you a good opportunity to regularly check in and go, are we on the right tracks? Do we need to realign? Are there things that we need to deprioritize? Are there things that we need to, are there new things that we need to bring in based on what it is that we're seeing? So it's a great opportunity to do that realignment, reprioritization. Are we on track in terms of the value and impact that we are looking to achieve? So there's an element there around your quarterly cadence and the planning pieces. I think then it's also, when it comes down to sort of your middle managers and your execution teams, it's making sure that they are thinking about the strategy in their meetings and in their delivery rhythms as well. So what I mean by that is, if you're doing monthly planning sessions, start with the like what's the why, or what's the OKR that we're focusing in on, really bring it back into the outcomes that we are looking to achieve. How are we going to be delivering value? What does that mean in terms of the things that we're going to be focusing in on? And it's kind of looking at how you build those cadences and rhythms of like meetings, checkpoints, those progress reviews, and then also those times for reflection, but making sure that you're really focusing on your outcome, not just the outputs and the tasks and how we work together. So it's a balance of kind of balancing the deliverables, outputs, here's what we've been working on with but also how has that translated into the impact that we want to be delivering and the outcomes and OKRs that we're working towards. And it's really how you feed that into every touch point, working session, planning session, piece that makes that strategy stick to a certain degree. Because the other side of the coin that you've got to think about is, and I loved when you were talking about like the November day and it's grey and it's dreary, etc., etc. The other sort of visual that always comes up into my mind is when BAU starts to creep back in, or you've got those whether you're in retail and you're heading into peak sales season, or it's the end of the financial year, or for my customers that work in like events, they've got their big events that are coming up. Those are, to me, like those are sort of predictable BAU pressure points where business as usual. Sorry for the acronym.
You're good. Just
no. But that's kind of, those are sort of like classic sort of like business as usual pressure points where you probably know that the strategic focus is going to start to drift. There will be other sort of pressure points. I think most people, for a lot of businesses, they can probably identify what their classic pressure points are, and there'll be others where you'll go, oh, didn't think that was one. But when those pressure points start to come in, I think you just have to plan for drift. To your point, like 6 months down the line, you kind of have to plan and know that there are going to be points where morale's going to dip, or business as usual, and those other pressure points are going to start to come in, and that's going to cause drift in terms of our strategic focus. So how do we plan for that? In those instances, what is our minimum viable like strategic focus? Where do we shift the scope of what we're going to work on to allow for that pressure to happen, because it's going to? And then how do we bounce back? When that period has passed, how are we then going to bounce back and bring back that clarity and shift that focus back into the strategy and what it is that we're working on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the big one, consistency, and we tend not to be good at consistency. We tend to kind of. It's really interesting the amount of industries that we work on that they're well matched. There's a good strategy there, whether it's towards marketing or whether it's towards safety. But complacency kicks in. Things, and it's always bringing it back to consistency. You mentioned AI. We talk about AI a lot on here. We've been huge advocates for the last 2 years since kind of everything changed. And I'm not convinced everybody realizes how much it's changed, but it has changed significantly. How is it going to change your industry? Or how is it changing your industry?
So, I mean, massively. And I think it has the potential to continue to massively change. I think in terms of like the work that I'm doing, and this is not, I want to be really clear, this is nothing new. You kind of speak to anyone or spend any time on LinkedIn and this is all the same. So I'm just reaffirming what everyone already knows in terms of, it still feels like we're very much in the experimentation stage. There are businesses that are, light years ahead, and they're really, they've really thought about the system that they need to have around AI. And I think that more and more businesses are starting to move towards that, but it still feels very nascent in terms of we're playing around with it. We're still trying to understand where it sits, and trying to work out then what the system is that we build around that to support that growth. Because I think the biggest challenge for my industry, or at least where I'm working, is not having the system in place and then you're scaling something that is sort of broken or hasn't been fully operationalized, and so you're growing things that aren't working in the right way, or you're modeling your AI, you're modeling AI and it's not focusing in on the right things, or it's not fully measuring the right metrics. So there's an element of, we talk about this a lot, my background, agile ways of working. One of the things that I always talk about is go slow to go fast. And I really believe some of that in terms of AI. It makes sense to, take the time up front to build your systems and then scale it, because you'll have the right scaffolding to make that work in the right way. Otherwise, a year, 2 years down the line, you're kind of having to retrofit what you've built because it isn't quite right.
How do we guess what's right? And the reason I ask that, it is moving so quickly.
Yeah.
Is there a danger that we do build something around it becomes obsolete like really quickly? Or is it more of a danger of not doing something?
I mean, it's a balancing. It's definitely going to be like a balancing act. I think we have to recognize that there are going to be things that will become obsolete. What I would say is, it's more about, in those instances, where have we got the checkpoints to be valid, to be reflecting on that. I think again, it's making sure it's not about not doing anything. That's probably the worst thing that you could be doing. But do you have safeguards and guardrails in place for the things that you're doing, so that there are those regular checkpoints to go, is this still right? Is this generating, to interrogate it, to really look at it critically and go, have we done this right? Where's it failing us? Where do we need to course correct? So I think it's about definitely go and do, but think about your safeguards and your guardrails around it, so that you're capturing the pinch points or the areas of friction as quickly as possible, so that you can then put corrective measures in place as needed.
So never assume that we're full agreement with AI either. So we might not have full agreement. There you go. We always say lower the bar. When we're looking for agreement on anything, if I'm going into work with a team, it's like, let's lower the bar. It's probably not going to happen. Let's see how we get a consensus. Let's see how we get close to it. And I suppose one of the things that we see is people being or teams not making decisions, not implementing something, holding back, and that's and I think we're all guilty of it. We've all done it, so that's not a judgment.
Yeah, no one wants to fail. No one wants to fail, and part of that is, we have to be able to create a culture where learning and failing to a degree is appreciated, it's encouraged. And the more that we have that, then the easier that decision-making piece becomes. We're just going to get started, and we're going to start with something very small, like MVP, minimum viable product, minimum viable solution, whatever it is you're looking at, and scale it from there. But I think that indecision paralysis tends to come from teams being scared to make a decision, be accountable for it, and the consequences of that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose culture comes into it, and then also kind of our own preferred styles. Probably won't surprise you. I'm quite a bit of a risk taker. I like taking risks, but I know plenty of people who won't. So I take them on their behalf for some reason. I don't know why. When we talk about cultures, you work a lot. You work with global companies. You work across borders. You've got something that's agreed in London. How do we make sure it's relevant in Sydney or Dubai or New York or LA? Or how do we make sure? But what do you think?
So, there's a few things that spring to mind there, and I guess one of the things that we need to start to think about there is what's the decision design, or the decision framework that we're building, because you can have global HQ in London, and so there's probably an element of like, what is it that they're responsible for? What's the decision that they get to make? That's now been agreed. Okay. And then, what does that mean in terms of the decisions that, your office in Sydney make? Is it that they, what it feels like it should be, very simplistically, we could spend hours talking about like nuance here, but, if you've got a global HQ, they should be deciding the global vision. This is what we're working towards. This is the outcomes. And then, regions, they decide how does that now translate into what we're seeing in our local market dynamics? What does that mean when it comes to APAC or the US? Or the Middle East, or getting further down to country specific level, depending on how your company is structured. So I think some of that is having real clarity in terms of this is what global HQ is deciding, and this is what this is its remit, and then this is what happens at the regional level. How does that feedback loop then happen? So again, it's not about going off and doing whatever it is that you want to do. There's an element of like, right, let's now see what it is that you're doing. How does that align? Where is there friction? Let's dive into that to understand, like, are we not understanding something that you're seeing locally? To me, friction is a diagnostic point. So it's an element of diving into where are you then starting to see those frictions, and understanding it there. But I think some of that is the decision design, and it's a little bit as well about autonomy and empowerment, and what is it you're going to free up and let those local divisions, local regions decide on, versus what you want to have more oversight on. Because I think governance, when it's done right, can be an enabler and an accelerator. When it's done wrong, it's the biggest thing that will slow you down if you're having to spend 6 weeks back and forth agreeing and deciding on strategy, where you're going to be moving towards, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of having a bit more agility in terms of governance, and like I say, building the systems and conditions that enable that, decentralization of control to happen where it makes the most sense for it to, where it makes the most sense for that.
We can have all the systems in place. What's the difference with leader? I'm thinking leadership here. I know leaders who have brought strategies to life. They've coloured them in. We've got the picture. We're there with it. And others who have basically announced it and expected us to get on. What do you see the difference between those two? What jumps out for those leaders?
Yes, I think so. The difference between the two would probably be, so let's go with when a leader is doing it well, because that's probably, because a lot of this will be when a leader isn't doing it right. It's the exact opposite. So I think the first one is like, if a leader's doing it well, like they are consistently communicating that strategy, and they're using the same language, they're using the same terminology, and there's a level of consistency and repetitiveness around it. One thing that I always talk about with my clients is like, if you're sick of talking about your strategy, you've probably done it just about enough for it to land within your teams, because clarity within your leadership team doesn't mean clarity 2, 3, 4 layers below. So there's an element of when a leader's doing it right, there's a real strong sort of communication piece behind it, and consistency in terms of that communication. They're also modeling the strategy, and by that I mean they're talking about it in terms of, if we think like systems, again, they're incentivizing the things that are going to be driving the right behaviors that build towards our strategy. They're open about having conversations around trade-offs, because to deliver a strategy isn't saying yes to everything. There are things that we have to say no to, and they're modeling that behavior in terms of, these are the trade-offs. We need to say yes to this, so that means we're not going to do that. You need more capacity, or you need more resource, or you need more support to be able to deliver that. Let's talk about how we can give you that. Like a good leader, where the strategy is landing, is building, is driving the enablement and the conditions that are going to help their teams like deliver it. There's nothing more demoralizing. And I have been in this situation where you're given a strategy and it's like, I don't have the manpower, or I don't have the budget, or I don't have the skill set to deliver that in the way that it needs to be delivered. The worst thing a leader can do is be like, get on with it. A great leader will be the person that turns around and says, let's talk about how we get you there. That isn't a promise that we can do everything. It's a business. You know, we don't have, you know, limitless budgets. Would love that. But it's about a leader being open to having conversations in terms of like, right, like we've got a point of friction. So let's talk about what those friction points are, what we can do, and let's be realistic where we might need to realign our strategy if actually the reality on the ground is X, Y, and Z. And I think that's where leaders do it right. And you can infer from that the opposite in terms of where leaders do it wrong.
We're just going to go into the last kind of two or three questions. Is there a brand that you think they've got that alignment right? It kind of just comes through the brand, what they're saying, what they're doing, how the people are. You know that it matches kind of that strategy. And there's that, I don't know, I think we can all connect with brands. But I'm curious from your point of view, seeing it as a professional, do you see any companies that like they kind of live and breathe it, and it's just who they are?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple that definitely spring to mind. I think, like kind of what you were just saying, I think it becomes very obvious when you know a business has done it right based on the customer base and how much they love a product, love using it, love the experience when they're working with those brands. Like for me personally, like Miro, I think does a really great job, not just in terms of like the product itself, which is great, and I use it all of the time. It's a great tool. It helps me, you know, massively in terms of what I do day to day. But I think their marketing is great. I have been to a few of their events, and you know, you can see it across all of the different touch points that they have in terms of they've got that real clarity in terms of who they are, why they're there, like who they're serving. And I think when you start to see those elements come together, you're starting to see that that's where they've got a strong strategy, execution, balance in place. And there'll be other brands, I'm sure, that I can think of, but that's probably an immediate one that springs to mind.
You just explain what Miro do, and we'll pop a link into the chat on the on the post. Just a link to Miro. But what did he do?
Well, so essentially, Miro is essentially like it's a collaboration tool. It's probably the easiest way that I can describe it, because you can use it for so many different things. But it's a way to bring. It's a tool that can help you bring people together, particularly if you're all remote, hybrid, et cetera, to collaborate. Essentially. So that could be ideating on a new proposition. It could be, you know, building out a new business model. It could be mapping your processes and identifying like where you've got pinch points, et cetera. It's just a really great tool for designing things in it and working together as a team. And it becomes a living, breathing document. I like it because PowerPoint decks get static and they just sit and they can gather dust, like on the internet and in your intranets, et cetera. Like with Miro, it becomes a lot easier for those to be living, breathing, evolving documents, which I think is very important from a strategy perspective as well.
So a couple of questions we always ask at the end. Just from your point of view, for someone to be successful in your industry, to kind of do what you do, what kind of traits do you think are really important for someone in doing what you do, Sian?
Yeah. So doing what I do in particular, I think the first one is be curious. You kind of have to be the person that's always curious and ask the why. So curiosity is definitely like a big one. I think and part of that as well is also the curiosity piece is being open. Big part of what I do is I have to be open to different perspectives, different ideas. I just have to be open to listening to the challenges that are coming through. So that curiosity and openness piece is really important. I definitely believe in like being consistent. And it doesn't have to be like my old PT, this is just coming into my mind right now, but my old PT used to say like every day a little better. So we're not talking about it having to be like a big thing, but I think consistency is important, and particularly when it comes to like new skills or new habits or new behaviors that you are trying to embed. And then collaborative. I definitely think that as marketers in particular, and also if you're working in transformation, collaborate. You can't do your job if you're not collaborative and if you're not working with and co-creating with people. I also think there's just a heck of a lot of resilience is needed, whether you're in marketing or whether you're doing what I do, because not like the reality is a lot of the things that you're going to try aren't going to work, or they're not going to work in the way that you thought they would. So I think having resilience and being able to sort of check your ego at the door becomes a really powerful tool to just being able to sort of like look at what you're seeing and move with it versus trying to challenge it or counteract it, or even sort of and I'm a type A personality perfectionist, like being really critical about yourself and the role that you play in things. So I think there's definitely an element of resilience and checking your ego at the door, like where you can. Because I think that just opens your mind up to lots of different ways to doing things. And I think that's the great thing about what I do. When you're focusing on the what and the why, the how then becomes there's thousands, millions of potential possibilities that get you there. And that can be also where the learning of new skills, learning new different ideas, that's where the growth can come in, when you suddenly open yourself up to lots of different possibilities for doing and achieving something.
And as you mentioned earlier, even being able to take that from one industry into another and just, not being stuck in one area. Final question. Promise. Final question.
Yeah.
We always like to throw down a challenge. So throw down a challenge to anyone listening to, try something a little bit different, say over the next kind of 14 days.
What
would your suggestion be?
Joe, my suggestion, just given a little, my suggestion would probably be to find 3 instances, 3 if you can, but definitely find like a few different opportunities where you can say no to something. I think that it's a really good habit to be able to get into, the ability to be able to say no and to do it in a constructive way. This isn't, definitely don't go into a room and just go like, no, but get used to being able to turn around and say no, or I don't think that's the right idea. Get comfortable with being able to sort of, have those kind of conversations, have that sort of friction. I think that it's very easy to just get into the habit of going with the flow, or people pleasing. I'm a people pleaser at heart, so it's definitely something that I had to learn early on in my career. So if you are one of those people, I think learning the art of being able to say no is really, really powerful. So that would probably be my challenge for those that struggle with that. Go out and find some instances where you can say no in a constructive way.
Nice. Sian, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your insights. And
thank you. Loved it.
I look forward when we catch up again. Speak soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks very much, Graham.
Bye.